Good evening. It's now 6:01. I think it's time for us to get started, so I would like to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for January the 18th, 2022. And before we get started, I would like to remind everybody that today is Election Day. You have until 7 o'clock tonight to vote. If there's anybody who needs to vote, there's a ballot box just outside the city if you go out the door to the left and around the corner. Or you can also go to the city clerk's office, which is the last door on the right before you go outside. So if anybody needs to vote, please exercise your right to do so. With that said, we'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. You'll all join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Does anyone need to vote? No, before I ask for the agenda, if you're here for something and you need to vote, maybe we'll think about moving the agenda around so you can do it and we can get our business done. But if we don't have that concern, let's go ahead and push forward. So with that, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
Roll call, please.
Okay, roll call. City Clerk, please.
Yes. Council members Judith Chandler. Present. Julie Wolf. Here. Natalie Johnson. Here. Nancy Fortune. Present. Michelle Weatherholt. Here. Mayor Pro Tem John Shada.
Here.
And Mayor John Graham.
Present, but apparently a little absent-minded. Sorry. Okay, so I would now entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Fortune.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Johnson. All in favor? Any discussion? Nope. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, great. Motion passes 7-0. Okay, now we have public comment on non-agenda items. So if there's anyone here who would like to speak to a topic other than something that's on the agenda, now would be the time. Do we have any? Yes, sir. Okay. And Judy, do we have this gentleman?
Scott Harvey is who I have.
Harvey? Okay. Mr. Harvey, come forward, please. And when you get to the microphone, if you give us your full name and address. Oh, yeah, okay, to speak, that'd be okay. Also, you'll need to push the button so that the green light comes on, and you'll need to... Okay, I'm sorry, my bad. Could you put your mask back on? Just
Okay.
Get within about 3 inches of the mic.
Okay, great. My name's Scott Harvey, and I work here, but I don't live here, but I hope that allows me to speak. I wish to share something with you that I ran across that I think is relevant.
Excuse me, Steve, could we get your address?
My address is 515 Manitou Avenue. That's where I work. I live here.
Okay, how about your residential address, just for the record?
120 Winters Drive, Colorado Springs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. I ran across this, and I'm always curious as to where things are going. Social issues, environmental issues, and stuff like that. Where's things going? And I ran across this that I think is relative as we go forward here. And this is from NIH.gov website, June 29th, 2009. All human-adapted influenza A viruses of today, both seasonal variations and those that caused more dramatic pandemics, are descendants, direct or indirect, of the 1918 Spanish flu. If that gives you any indication of where this is going, I think that's really a bellwether piece of information there. A little note from a cardiologist who says that I think what we've had here is a fast pandemic in terms of COVID that has exasperated and taken advantage of a slow pandemic, which is the pandemic of chronic lifestyle-related diseases that have been putting stress on the healthcare systems for many years. According to him, roughly 60% of the American diet is ultra-processed food, which is basically the heart of the problem. So we've heard an awful lot of words around the pandemic issue. Mask, social distancing, closures, vaccines, etc. And I think the saddest and most irresponsible thing that we don't hear is lifestyle and nutrition. it's so sad that that is not highlighted whatsoever. And I think as the community of Manitou has a great capacity to instill upon its groups and committees and stuff like that, things that elevate the lifestyle and dietary needs of people so that we can all suffer through this for the next 100 years in a better form than we have been. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Anyone else? All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. Tonight, we have 3 items on the consent calendar. The first, approval of the January 4th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. The second, approval of engineering design contract for traffic and operational improvements to the on-off ramps of US 24 at Manitou Avenue. And the third, approval of an intergovernmental agreement with CDOT to authorize federal funds for the broadband project. If there's any member of council who would like to pull an item off for discussion, we can do that. If not, I'd entertain a motion to, excuse me, Councilor Chandler.
I move to remove F2 from the consent calendar for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to remove anything? Councilor Wolf?
I move to adopt number 1 and 3 of the consent calendar.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Want a second?
I'm sorry, second.
I'll second it.
Okay, second, yes, please. Okay, seconded by
Slow to move.
Nancy. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye, motion passes, thank you. Okay, so now we'll discuss item F2, approval of the engineering design contract for US 24 at Manitou Avenue. Councilor Chandler, you had some concerns?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Dole for getting the RFP. I'm going to be really honest. I got it, but I wasn't able to get through it. So I was hoping maybe you could give us a little background on the RFP and the bids that came in and what the process was for choosing the contractor that you went with.
Sure. This project is led by
Dole, could you introduce yourself and address, please?
Dole Grabenick, city engineer from Manitou Springs. This project was initiated by the URA, who has concerns about mobility, congestion in that interchange area. So we developed an RFP, which you saw, which was soliciting engineering services for design concepts at those off-ramps and area. And we had 3 bidders, and then as the email said, we had 3 bidders and we had 3 reviewers, and we went through and ranked them per the criteria in the RFP. I can't remember exactly, personnel, experience, schedule, cost, maybe something like that. And based on their proposals, some of their real high-level conceptual stuff that they did in their proposals, the 3 of us then selected the top 2 firms based on those scores, and then we interviewed the top 2 firms to kind of get to hear their perspective, their visions, and then based on that, we selected the firm that we're recommending approving the proposal for, which is Matrix Design.
Could I?
Yeah. Councilor Fortune?
I would just, as having been at the URA meetings when they were talking about this, I would say that safety was a significant driver of this contract. Because anyone who walks, drives, or bikes through there, it's treacherous.
Yeah, the merge length is too short. There's no pedestrian refuge. I mean, there's a lot of issues. So I wasn't going to get into the engineering details. I was just going to go over the proposal process.
Okay. Councilor Chandler, is that adequate, or do you have follow-on questions? Or?
I have no follow-on questions. Thank you. You've answered my questions.
Okay. Do any other councilors have questions for Dole? Okay, I guess not. Okay, thank you, Dole.
I'll go ahead and move that we approve the engineering design contract for traffic and operational improvements to the off-on ramps of US 24 at Manitou Avenue.
I'll second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Councilor Wolf? Oh, okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, quick draw on the Old West. Okay, no further discussion. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Great, thank you. Motion passes unanimously. All right, next item, G1, presentation. This is recognition of Michelle Anthony, who will be retiring after many years of service. And I believe Denise has some remarks to make.
Yeah, Michelle, do you mind coming up to the table? I'm going to read what was in your packet, and then we'll be giving Michelle a little item for appreciation and to show her the appreciation that she's done that she's served this community over the years. And then Mayor, if it would be appropriate, I'd like for each council member to make a remark if they would like. Michelle Anthony began her career with the City of Manitou Springs on June 24th, 1987. When she began, her job title was of Planning Secretary. During this time, the Planning Department acquired its first word processor and its first filing cabinet for its records. Now, as many of you know, the Planning Department office is lined with files from the floor to the ceiling. It is safe to say that Michelle has had a hand in almost every property file in that room. Michelle has experienced the city's evolution as an organization and the community's evolution through the ups and downs over the past 30 years. During her time with the Planning Department, Michelle worked diligently to make Manitou Springs a certified local government through the State Historical Preservation Office and the National Park Service. Michelle led the way into making historical preservation a standard in Manitou Springs as opposed to an option. Michelle also played a vital role in preserving the Cliff House and the spa building by securing millions of dollars in funding from the State Historical Fund, saving important pieces of Manitou Springs history from almost certain destruction. In addition, parking in Manitou Springs began with an initiative of Michelle's, as she was the one who spearheaded the long process of the residential parking program, year-long parking enforcement, the creation of the Transportation and Parking Board, and paid parking. Without Michelle's efforts, we would not be in such a good place now where we can make many different changes and adjustments to improve mobility. When Michelle thinks about her time with the city, she remembers all of the controversial topics that she experienced, ranging from paid parking to gambling to recreational marijuana dispensaries. It's fair to say that Michelle has been involved and front row seat to Manitou Springs' most interesting times. Now that she is retiring, she will be focusing on some projects she has at home, many of which are needlework. She plans to spend more time with her mother, travel, and focus on herself. She will also be opening an online collectible and antique sales business with a friend of hers, so watch for that. As we all could have assumed, Michelle will of course be staying to work with the Manitou Springs Heritage Center and will continue to compile information on Manitou Springs history. We wish her the very best in her future endeavors, and we cannot thank her enough for her dedication to Manitou Springs. Michelle, has been a pleasure working with you, and I hope you pay us a visit in the future so we can hear all about how your retirement is treating you. It is well deserved. With that, we are also giving her the Rockies Collection book. And as you know, Michelle loves art. She collects art and loves Rocky. So this is the gift that we are giving her from this city.
Michelle, we're going to let the city council people speak, and then I think if you'd like to speak, that'd be a good thing to do too. Anyone on council want to start off? Julie, please.
Michelle, how dare you retire? I just personally want to thank you. I have enjoyed working with you over the years, even when we were in severe disagreement on things. I just always appreciated your knowledge and your willingness to discuss. I know how hard you've worked and what insane hours you've put in. I just really appreciate everything you've done for the city, and I've enjoyed getting to know you.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, it's true. I can't imagine the city without you. It's a weird thing to think about. But I know that I'll get to see you all the time, which I'm looking forward to. And I think that, the real trouble is just getting started. You get to dive in and do all the things you've always wanted to. So I congratulate you on your retirement, and I appreciate everything you've done.
Great, thank you. Mr. Shada?
I don't think people realize what a great taste Michelle has. And it's everywhere, and everything she does in terms of that shows up in the community, from the downtown project to all sorts of great things she's done in historic preservation, little touches in terms of just how brochures are put together or just how the downtown streetscape looks. That's about 95% Michelle Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I know the city would not be what it is today without you, Michelle. And on a very personal level, I know how many times you've picked up the slack. I mean, you know better than anyone how many planning directors we've had. And I know when I was on OSAC, you stepped up and helped get grants, which, yeah, I remember sitting in your office and you just on your keyboard making it so we could fit it in the right amount of space. So just multiple times you picked up the slack. You're in planning, and I see Dylan and Karen over there too. It's just an impossible job when people, if they don't like your decision, they take it out on you and blame you for it. But I know on a very personal level, when I first moved to Manitou, I was redoing my house, and my neighbors started giving me just a dreadful time about it. And I walked in, it was the first time I met you, and I said, what's the real rules on this? And you came out and put my mind at ease. I was in tears at this point, because anyone who does construction knows how frustrating remodeling can be. And you just put my mind at ease, and you were so kind, and I will forever appreciate that so much. So thank you, and I'm glad you're staying in Manitou, because I know you've got more to do. But enjoy your retirement, too. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Counselor Chandler?
Yeah, I hear you're not really retiring. Now you're opening up another business. So I think that's wonderful. I was thinking about what I might say. I've been in the planning department and seen all those files, but I think what your work means to me is in 1987, my youngest daughter was 1, and now she's in her 30s, and I have 2 grandchildren, aged 5 and 1, and they live here now. So we have 3 generations, and I think about everything that I know of and have heard that you have done or touched or influenced in this town. And I just want you to know that I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it will influence generations to come. And I'm just so grateful that my children and my grandchildren get to live in a community that you influenced in such a profound way. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
I just want to say, Michelle, congratulations on your retirement. I am new to council, and I'm very excited that you are staying in Manitou, because I've wanted to reach out to you and will be reaching out to you, and I have a lot to learn. So thank you and congratulations.
Great. Thank you. And I would like to add, I very much appreciate your terms of service. You've brought a great deal of stability and consistency to the city. There are times when we sort of lose focus and we change direction here and there, but I think having the stability with historic preservation, with planning, has done a lot for the cultural fabric of the city. I think, looking back to when people were first talking about an historic preservation ordinance, there was tremendous dissension, and here we have these independent-minded Manitou people who aren't going to put up with any kind of regulation, and many people just thought, how will we ever be able to have some sort of workable set of guidelines or rules for historic preservation? And somehow we managed to work our way through that. And I think a tremendous amount of that was due to you. I think you tempered that, you understood the nature of people, the special taste that's Manitou. And I think much of our success in having an historic fabric that's appealing and yet not oppressive, a lot of that rests on your shoulders, and that's to your credit. So thank you very much for that. We'll miss you, but you know where to find us. We know where to find you. Thanks.
Mayor, before Michelle speaks, can I just say, Michelle will be taking 30 days off, and then we are talking to her about helping us with some granting and some other things. So we are looking at that too. So I think Michelle will stay involved in different ways, just not the full-time employee and in the planning, but we do see some opportunities that's coming up for her.
Great, thank you. Michelle?
Thank you all. You're trying really hard to make me cry, so. But I really appreciate all the kind words that I've heard tonight and that people have been sending me for the last several weeks since I announced my retirement. And it does your heart good, you know, to hear those things. And I hope I have been a good influence, and I hope that people do carry on. And when people say, oh, you know, you can't be replaced and all of that, I can be replaced. Everybody is replaceable. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next generation of people do. I'm hoping that they take the ball and they run it faster and better. And you guys, whoever's sitting here 20 years from now, is looking back and we're in even better shape than they ever could have gotten under me. So I'm just glad to leave things in the shape that I am, and I hope that there are things I can do to continue to help, and I just appreciate it. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you very much. Okay, our next item of business is Emerald Fields Dual Operation Marijuana Facility, a request for approval of change of ownership. And we're going to hear from Karen Bechtold from Planning on this.
Well, good evening, Mayor Graham and
Karen,
council.
you have to leave your mask on, I'm
Oh, we do?
sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
I can do that. Good evening, Mayor Graham and city council members. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, I'm here this evening to present a request for a change in ownership for one of our two dual operation marijuana facilities. So as you know, our facilities are required to have a license for both medical and marijuana sales. And as we review requests from marijuana facilities, we work closely with the state medical enforcement division. We really have kind of a mirrored process, and for every approval that we grant, we also turn to the state to follow their, to track their approvals as well, and certainly rely on their approvals. And so in this case, the owner of Emerald Fields is proposing to sell their business to a firm called Schwaz. The track of the org chart for the sale is a little bit complicated, but it actually is a transfer to a different business. And as the city considers this, well, first of all, I worked closely with our city attorney on this process. And so we determined that there are really two things to evaluate. And actually, just to back up a little bit, so this evening, you may approve the request this evening, or you may consider it and determine that you believe a hearing is held. And if you want to request the hearing, we need to notice that 10 days in advance by property notice. And so we considered really two major questions. And the first is that the proposed owners are qualified for and not prohibited from operating a medical and retail marijuana business in the state of Colorado. And so as part of the applicant's application, they forwarded us their complete state application, which provides documentation indicating that all of the owners of 10% or more of the company have been approved for ownership in our state. And so we have that documentation. We would want to ensure that that documentation remains up to date, and so added that as a condition. And so in our kind of mirror process with the state, we really rely on the state to conduct this thorough background check for ownership. And so we determined that they indeed are qualified for operating a dual marijuana business in our community. And the second question that we looked at was whether the business is in compliance with local and state requirements for operating a dual marijuana operation. We determine compliance on an annual basis. We have a process for annual renewal of the license, and again, we review that at both the local level and then await the state confirmation as well. And so we have a couple different approaches for monitoring compliance. We have our annual license renewal process, which also includes an inspection of the facility. And then we have ongoing business license approvals, and our neighborhood service officer and fire marshal inspect the business for all the safety aspects that relate to the business license. And our neighborhood services officer has been very pleased with the compliance from their end of the process. And so we did not identify any key issues related to compliance. I did include a little update on the issue of U-turns onto Crystal Hills Boulevard. We did meet with the applicant and proposed that they include an entryway sign at their driveway. Staff did some field work and found that would be a good a good approach to really emphasizing exactly where the driveway is, so drivers heading west are less apt to miss that access point. And so the current general manager is working with us at this stage to make that happen. So staff did recommend approval of the change in ownership with the two conditions as noted. The owner did not believe that any change to fiscal impact would occur. They're planning to continue the same product line, and we don't see any additional workload impact from this request for change of ownership. So I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments, and I understand also that a representative of the owner will be here this evening.
Yes, thank you. So I guess this is a good time to open up for questions or comments from council for Karen. Okay. If not, I'm sorry, Natalie?
Sorry, this sounded, I think, crazy. I'm just, to hold a hearing, like we would only ask to hold a hearing if we didn't feel like the questions were answered, and then we would just basically duplicate your efforts in a different capacity. Is that kind of what that means?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you. I think Nancy was next. I vote Nancy, and then we'll do Julie. Nancy?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, less about the business itself than about the signage. And it said in your cover sheet, and Dole may be able to answer this, but it said in your cover sheet, the Public Works is tracking the issue of U-turns on Crystal Hills Boulevard, and I wonder what they're doing, how they are tracking, and if there's any results of that tracking. I'll say this because it's probably the biggest concern that I get in my ward, at least in the Crystal Hills neighborhood, is about U-turns on the lower Crystal Hills Boulevard there. What is Public Works doing to track U-turns as stated in your cover sheet?
So Public Works has the ability to track some traffic movements through mobile phone data, and they did observe patterns that seem to correlate with some U-turns in that corridor, and I'm not sure if there's subsequent data to confirm if they have decreased or not at this point.
Okay, since you have it, I would just be very interested in seeing what they're doing to track and what implications there are if there's a way to not only track, but to act on U-turns. And I was very pleased to see that, you've got residents only, no through traffic signs. They're kind of far up the hill, but, which might be problematic, it might be, but I know that the Comfort Inn is, or whatever they call it now, the hotel is right there, but that's the only business. So if the residents-only signs, I don't know if you've considered moving those closer to the Manitou Avenue?
Well, Dol Gerbenek again. So we've done a couple of things at this, is that we have access to that streetlight data now, which helps us track traffic volumes. So what I did was I did a turning movement count at that intersection, and then I also did a gate, is what the system calls it, much further up Crystal Hills past the bridge. So further south past the bridge. So then I was able to figure out, by figuring out how many cars went from Manitou Avenue onto Crystal Hills, and then also went through that gate, the delta was how many cars were potentially driving in, doing a U-turn, and coming back out, if that makes sense. Because that means they weren't going all the way through Crystal Hills. That road, as far as the data analysis that we have, very, very low volume. I can't remember the exact numbers, very low volume. And that delta was was just a few cars. There was not any kind of significant data drop. So basically, most of the cars that went from Manitou Avenue to Crystal Hills also went through and under the bridge further up Crystal Hills. The big traffic volumes are coming onto Crystal Hills in the morning, going to Manitou Avenue. And then I think it was like 7 cars in the peak AM during the week. And then the afternoon was peak PM going home. It's like the same 7 cars. The other thing we did do is we coordinated with the police department. They kind of did extra patrol. Chief Bill kind of hung out up there. He didn't notice any U-turns. Every time we're driving back through, we don't notice any U-turns. So all we can say is that based on the data that's available to us, we did not observe any kind of a U-turn or anything that caused any kind of a challenge to the intersection, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you, and I appreciate that. This is why I love data, is that I can go back to my constituents and say that potentially what we're hearing is anecdotal versus actual issues. So, and then the other question I had, Karen, thank you, Dole. The other question I had is on the sign, the 3x3 foot sign that the new owners plan to put up. Is that to the east or west of the Emerald Field sign? Or where is that going to be?
It's actually, I think it's 3 by 1 feet, so 3 square feet of sign area. That will be just to the west of the driveway. And so it would be just in front of the freestanding sign, the large sign.
The
that you see
Emerald
from the
Field
roadway.
sign or the Crystal Hill sign?
The Emerald Field sign.
So to be just west of that?
Yes, just right up against the driveway. And the problem was that we really couldn't identify a good location near the Crystal Hills sign to put the sign there where it would be separate from that sign and sort of not cause a conflict. And when we observed the driveway coming from the east, what we saw was that you can't quite see where you're supposed to access the property. And so we thought that it made sense to really highlight that entryway so that it's very apparent as folks are pulling into that left turn pocket.
Okay, and great. And I'm glad that you guys followed up on those questions, previous questions that you've had on this. And it'll just be interesting to see if the data that Dole is tracking changes at all, even if it's only 7 people, based on signage. So thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Good, thank you. Councilor Wolf?
When you mentioned about the the obligation for them to stay updated as to their compliance, is that something the state handles? Do they require a once-a-year update? Or is that something that Manitou has to start doing, or already does?
I believe that, well, I noted that because one of the state approvals was through December of 2021. And so what I think will happen is the annual renewal for their local license is March 31st. And so very soon they'll submit an application for renewal for this year. And so we would look for that updated information in that packet as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Chandler?
I will move to approve the request for change of ownership of Emerald Fields dual operation marijuana establishment with the 2 staff recommended conditions as outlined in the memorandum.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I believe we do have the applicant's representative here. Karen, it sounds like we're close to a vote, but perhaps we should give the applicant an opportunity to address council. And if council members have any questions. Okay. If council has no objection, let's let the applicant's representative address us, and if we have any questions.
Kind of odd for me to address a tribunal with while I'm sitting down, but my name is Charles Houghton. I'm an attorney in Colorado Springs. I represent Emerald Fields. I came here tonight to answer any questions the city council may have regarding this change of ownership. I have with me Mr. Dan Pabone, who drove down from Denver. He is the general counsel and director of governmental affairs for Schwaz, a former legislator for many years, and he can answer any questions that you have as well. So if you have any questions of me, I'm more than happy to answer. I know that Schwaz will be an better than average corporate citizen in the city of Manitou. I'm personally familiar with their operations. They operate throughout the state. They run probably one of the best operations the state has to offer. And so they're kind of the gold standard. And as far as we're concerned, we feel lucky to be able to introduce them into the Manitou community. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm sure Mr. Pabone would like to talk with you.
Councilors, any questions? Okay,
Cool.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the other gentleman would like to take the stand, please.
You bet you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Dan Pabone. I'm the General Counsel and an Executive Officer of the company that will be running this new operation, doing business as Schwaz. Our corporate entity is Medicine Man Technologies. We either run or have announced running 22 stores throughout the state of Colorado, as far north as Adams County and south as Huerfano County and Pueblo County, and kind of everywhere in between. We're very excited to be in partnership with the city and look forward to many, many years of working together. We certainly step into the shoes of a extremely dedicated operator, Emerald Fields, and we expect to meet or exceed those standards. We have a compliance manager in addition to myself who oversee all issues of compliance, public safety, anything associated with the sale, distribution, and purchase of retail and medical marijuana in the company. Compliance is our most important value. We believe that we are not in the cannabis business, but in the compliance business, and we have the opportunity and privilege to engage in this arena. And we take that responsibility very seriously, and we are committed to, again, working in partnership with our local regulators and the state, and we very much look forward to working with you. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions, council? Apparently not. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So we have a motion and a second, and to be clear, the motion included, it referred to the two staff recommendations, so I would like to go ahead and read those for the benefit of the audience. The first is the applicant shall ensure that documentation confirming Suitable proof of eligibility to hold the position or financial interest remains current. And the second point is applicant shall provide confirmation of State of Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division approval of change of ownership. So that's part of the motion. Council, any discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, it looks like we're ready for a vote. The motion is to approve. All in favor, say aye. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Very good. Karen, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you also.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to recognize Karen for taking this on. She has done this and also put together an SOP for a licensure program for the stores and has taken it from start to finish. We did not have lots of it documented, and we didn't have processes documented. So I'd like to recognize her for her hard work. It's outside of what she's normally done, and she took it on and has done an excellent job.
Great, thank you. Good point. Thank you very much, Karen. Appreciate it. Okay, next, item H2, electric vehicle charging stations update. So, okay, and we have Nancy Wilson, if you would,
Mayor, may I introduce this real quick?
yes, that'd be fine.
Thank you. During the budget season, I talked a little bit about this, and I said we're looking at some EV charging stations, but they were not in the budget because of the grant and whether we were going to submit that, and then what would we get in the grant. So this has been discussed a little bit during the budget season, but it is not part of the budget. These two wonderful individuals are the ones who really started this. They met with Roy and I. We did a lot of pre-work, and now Dole is the project manager on this, along with Roy will be supporting. So with that, I'll turn it over to them to do the presentation. Thank you.
So my name is David Hurlbert. Do you want me to state my address?
Your address, please,
Sure.
yes.
202 Chelton Road here in Manitou Springs.
And Nancy Wilson, 227 Pilot Knob Avenue, Manitou.
So Nancy and I are really here tonight to for a couple of things. One is to bring awareness to the upcoming transition to electric vehicles. Another is to educate on electric vehicle infrastructure. And then in addition is talk about why this is important to Manitou Springs, and then we're going to kind of conclude it with basically a proposal for installing some new electric vehicle infrastructure. I do have the slides. I don't know if, okay. So Nancy and I, back in April of last year, got together and essentially put together some information regarding electric vehicle infrastructure. We essentially met with, we met with several different organizations here in town, including the URA, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Metro District. And eventually we made our way to the city itself, and we, like Denise mentioned, we ended up working with Denise, Roy, and Dole on basically talking about what different options we would have for infrastructure, where would be good locations, the different types of infrastructure, things like that. We also added another member. We're calling ourselves the Electric Vehicle Task Force. Sonia Meinsma, she's what's called a Colorado EV Coach. She's with an organization that is actually supported by the state. They help communities, private companies, et cetera, basically plan for this electric vehicles as well. So really in 2022, our goal is two primary things. One is to apply for the CEO grant. It's the
Colorado Energy Office.
Yes, Colorado Energy Office grant, which we'll cover a little bit more later. The second is to try to basically source funding for 2 level 2 and 2 level 3 chargers for here in Manitou Springs. So, in terms of electric vehicle adoption, this chart on the right is actually provided by the state, and it shows that Colorado is actually number 2 in the country, and this is based on new vehicle registrations. Now, this data is actually from 2019, and it shows 0.65% of new vehicles that year were EVs. I didn't include it in this presentation, but there's actually the updated information from this year is January of 2021, that had grown to 6%, and December last month, it had grown to 12%. So 12% of new vehicle registrations last month in Colorado were electric vehicles. So they are quickly becoming more and more standard throughout our community and throughout the state. So there's also data suggesting that by 2030, 50% of new vehicles sold in the U.S. will be electric. So there's going to be quite a big shift from gasoline and diesel-fueled cars to electric over the next decade. And the other thing is Colorado itself has set a goal of 1 million new electric vehicles in the state by 2030. And so when they do surveys on why people haven't moved to electric vehicles yet, there's multiple factors such as cost, the range of the vehicle, et cetera. But the number one factor, again and again, is charging infrastructure. So essentially, if individuals aren't able to charge their car, then they're not ready to move to an electric vehicle. So this is why charging infrastructure really is such a critical step in helping promote that adoption of electric vehicles. So Colorado itself actually has an electric vehicle plan. This was started a couple of years ago. This includes that goal of hitting 1 million EVs by 2030. It also includes a big plan for EV infrastructure development. So that plan kind of consists of two different things. One is the EV charging corridor, which is on the map to the right. And so the state is actually building a lot of electric vehicle stations in essentially rural areas. And the reason for this is the metro areas, so basically Denver and parts of Colorado Springs, and the major highways, I-25 and I-70, are being covered by mostly private corporations or private infrastructure. So it's really the open areas or the rural areas of Colorado that are kind of lacking this infrastructure. So again, Colorado they're funding the sites as shown on the map, but then the other thing they're doing is offering these CEO grants to help kind of fill in the gaps in between their plan. So these grants are to help communities and private organizations fund their own infrastructure development. And in addition, they're doing state tax credits for people who purchase electric vehicles to help incentivize it. And then there's also an upcoming plan around buses, heavy-duty vehicles, and things like that. So I'm sure somewhere down the road we'll be coming again to talk about that. So the next slide is really about where are some of these, we call them level 3 fast chargers, which actually I'll explain a little bit more later. But these are essentially chargers that allow you to fill up an electric car in about 15 minutes to 30 minutes. So they bring it much closer to what we're used to as going to a gas station and filling up your vehicle. As you can see, there's actually relatively good coverage throughout Colorado. There's obviously some big gaps though, however. And one thing to note is I listed a lot of the small towns that either have electric vehicle, these high-speed chargers already installed or are in the process of installing these chargers. So you can see there's a lot of small towns across the state that are taking the initiative to make sure to have this infrastructure both for their residents and for visitors. If we zoom in a little bit to the Manitou Springs area, you can see that Colorado Springs itself just installed a charger downtown Colorado Springs. And as you go north or south along I-25, there are some private companies that have chargers installed. But as you go west out of Manitou, your first chargers are located in Fairplay or Buena Vista. There is a charger that is supposedly going in at Woodland Park. We don't have a lot of details of it yet. It's my understanding it's 1 or 2 chargers at the Valero gas station up in Woodland Park. So that most likely will be coming online at some point. But it still shows, regardless, the Manitou Springs area doesn't have really any support today for these high-speed chargers. So why is this important for the city? Well, it benefits two groups of individuals. It really benefits residents. So again, this allows for residents to quickly charge their electric vehicle, similar to what a gas station is today for gas-powered cars. And one thing that's unique with Manitou Springs is we have a lot of residents who do not have off-street parking. So either they lack a garage or a driveway, so they don't have the ability to actually charge their vehicle at night, which is most common for electric vehicle owners. So having these high-speed chargers in town would allow residents who lack, the off-street parking at home to be able to quickly charge these vehicles during the week, just like they would with their car today with gasoline. So this really helps remove that barrier for EV ownership for residents. The second thing it does is for visitors and tourists, it really it offers that same sort of ability if they're visiting or in town, but it also puts what I would say is Manitou Springs on the map. And what I mean by that is on the right here, these are a couple of screenshots from electric vehicle charging app. So most EV owners, you actually plan out your route if you're taking a road trip, if you're visiting somewhere, and these apps help identify charging locations, and they give you ratings, and they give you, the local amenities, that type of thing. So this map actually shows the two charging sites that are here in Manitou Springs today. Now, these charging sites are actually what we call level 2 chargers, which, again, I'll get into in a minute, but those chargers are essentially chargers that you would use for overnight charging. They take, 4 to 12 hours to charge your vehicle. They're not something that you would use quickly. But this shows that essentially we would be adding Manitou to those maps, to those apps for visitors, for tourists, et cetera, to show that we actually have high-speed charging infrastructure in town to support visitors, et cetera. So it helps with those types of individuals as well.
Yeah, just in terms of why am I here? So good. But when we started doing some research about why this is important in Manitou Springs, one of the things that I looked at is, do we have hotels or motels here that are offering chargers? Right now, we don't. Other than the new Holiday Inn is putting in a level 2 charger, so a slow charger, people charging overnight. As David alluded to, most people charge their cars at night, and most people charge their cars at home. So when we first started talking about this, one of the issues that we immediately realized is how many people live in Manitou Springs but don't have parking other than on the street, and how difficult that is. You can imagine cords running from your house out to the street, over the sidewalk, the liability. So if we really want people to adopt electric vehicle usage in Manitou Springs, we need to do something about it. The other thing is we certainly have a number of hotels between here and our eastern boundary, and only one now will have a charger. So we want to keep business here. We want to keep people supporting our local business, our local stores. When I heard that Woodland Park was getting fast chargers, I was like, well, now visitors to the Rockies will just skip over, who are driving EVs, skip over Manitou and go to Woodland Park and hang out there where their vehicle charges instead of here in Manitou Springs. So there are a lot of business implications for this, and kind of in keeping what we've all been thinking about is we can't think just about what we're doing for tourists and visitors, but we also have to think about what we can do for local residents in this regard.
Julie?
Did you say that we already have two chargers in Manitou?
So there's two locations. One is at the MAC and one is at the pool. And again, these are the level 2 chargers, which again are intended to, most of the time, level 2 chargers are at your house for filling your vehicle overnight. Or for example, like Nancy just mentioned, if you're staying at a hotel or something for a long period of time, they're not used to quickly fill your vehicle.
Who paid for them?
That's actually a good question. I'm not.
I assume it's Manitou property since it's not.
Yep.
Okay, Natalie, please.
We received a grant from Tesla for both locations. So Tesla paid for 100% of the art centers. It paid for the units at the pool, but it did not pay for install.
So does that mean that only Tesla vehicles are allowed to charge there, or is that available to anybody?
So, I believe the MAC has one of each. There's essentially two standards. Tesla has their own proprietary standard, and then everyone else uses a different standard. So there are adapters to go between the two, but essentially, I think everything long-term is eventually moving to the generic standard that all automakers are adopting. And my guess is eventually Tesla will move there as well. But in the meantime, there are adapters, so in theory, all electric vehicles could charge at those locations.
And can you help me understand, since people presumably don't sleep in the pool building, who would charge their vehicle for 24 hours at the pool? Like who uses that and how often does it get used? I don't get it.
My guess is, I mean, to be honest, they're probably, like at the pool or at the MAC, they're probably used just occasionally for someone who maybe is going on a hike or swimming at the pool just to get, 30 minutes, 60 minutes of charging. It's not intended, it's more of a convenience. It's not intended to be something that really allows you to go about your day and recharge quickly.
And then I have one last question, if I could. Can you help us understand, why are you recommending 2 level 2s and 2 level 3s? Because I'm having trouble envisioning who would want to use a level 2. Like, do you take an Uber home or do you hike home? Like, it sounds extremely inconvenient.
Sure. So there are situations, when we get to the proposal, the site that we've talked about is Hiawatha Gardens. And so, for example, if you have someone who comes into town and is spending the afternoon in Manitou, they may be walking around for 4 hours, they may be doing the incline, going up the Cog Railroad. In theory, their 4 hours of charging at Hiawatha Gardens could refill their car by 50, 70%, for example.
Oh, with a level 2?
Yes. So, and when you look at the costs, level 2 are substantially less expensive than a level 3. So there is definitely a need for level 2s, especially when you look at the cost. But ultimately, level 3 are what kind of gets everyone over that hurdle of that hesitation to adopt electric vehicles, because ultimately the level 3s are what allow you to fill quickly and keep going along. So again, for residents, I don't anticipate residents would pay to park at Hiawatha Gardens overnight or something like that. They're not going to do that. But if there were level 3 chargers there that they could, once or twice a week, sit there for 15, 20 minutes, that would be something that I think would be very attractive to residents, as an example.
Do cities usually charge for this?
Yes, so the state does have kind of a recommended amount to charge so that it's relatively consistent throughout the state. You do have the option with some of these vendors that supply the chargers. For example, you can set rates based on different criteria. So you could set it for different rates for different times of the day to promote charging at night when maybe electricity is cheaper. You could offer, residents could come in and apply for a discount, and so they could enter their discount and actually get a discounted rate. There's different ways you could structure the payments for the electricity, essentially.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to address the pool a second too, the chargers there don't seem to be used very much. I know my daughter-in-law drives a little EV, and we were doing something at the fairgrounds in Boulder, and she drove right out and plugged in her car, even though we were going to be there for maybe an hour. A lot of EV owners look for that because there's often very convenient parking, just like it is at our swimming pool, if you're going swimming. But the problem with the pool is it's so far away from our business district, our infrastructure, our restaurants, those kinds of things. So they really don't get used much unless people are going to walk the creek walk trail there or go swimming.
Is it easy to just move it? Can you just move it to somewhere better?
We thought of that.
Yeah, so yes and no. I mean, the chargers themselves for level 2 are relatively inexpensive. It's really the installation that's expensive. So because you have to, cut through concrete, run wire, et cetera. So there's probably not a lot of incentive to move them at this point, to be honest.
Thank you. If you'd like to go ahead and continue then?
So the other key reason why Manitou should be interested in adopting electric vehicles has to do with reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So back in 2007, the city did adopt a plan to try to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by the year 2020. So we did achieve that as a city, but that was focused on stationary energy, which is things like natural gas for heating homes, it's electricity, et cetera. So there was not a focus at that time on transportation specifically. So if you look at the chart on the right, this shows the greenhouse gas audit that was done for the city back in 2017. And it shows that transportation actually makes up the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions now. And so the city has obviously gone through, great efforts, including buying renewable energy, the hydroelectric plant, weatherization efforts, et cetera. And even our primary utilities, Colorado Springs Utilities, has a goal of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2030. So on the stationary energy side of things, we're making great progress. But when you look to transportation, we're really, there's not a lot being done. There are things like, obviously, we can promote driving less, promote walking, biking, et cetera, public transportation, those types of things. But inevitably, there's still going to be a large percentage of us that continue to drive cars, whether it's for commuting or for whatever reason. And so really, addressing the transportation part of this is something that's critical to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions throughout our city. So just really quick, so we've been talking about these quite a bit already, the different types of EV chargers. So just from an educational standpoint, the level 1, again, are what would essentially come with your electric vehicle that you would plug into your wall outlet at home, which can take 1 to 2 days to charge your car, so it's not very convenient. Level 2 is what we had talked about at the MAC and at the pool. This is also what the majority of EV owners install at their house. They typically require something like a dryer outlet or a oven outlet, and they can work with your at-home power. And those, again, would charge your electric vehicle overnight. And then the level 3, these are the fast chargers. They require basically a commercial level connection to the grid. So they're not something you're going to obviously install at your house. And even realistically, you're not going to probably install it at like a small company or something like that. This is something that is really going to be public infrastructure because of the cost to install it and the electrical connection required. But the huge advantage with the level 3 connections are, again, that time reduces down from 15 minutes to 30, 40 minutes, depending on the vehicle. So in terms of costs, the difference between the level 2 and level 3. So level 2 chargers, again, the slower of the two. Now these costs are for commercial grade level 2 chargers, which are quite a bit different than the ones that are at the MAC or the pool. These have the ability to charge different rates. These have the ability to charge 2 vehicles per charger, et cetera. That's why they are a little bit higher cost than what is currently installed at the pool today, which are essentially free, unconnected chargers. Anybody can just walk up and plug them in. So the level 2 chargers, once we subtract the CEO grant money, they're about $7,500 per charger. Again, each of those chargers could charge 2 vehicles at a time. The level 3 chargers, again, this is where these are substantially more expensive. Once we subtract the CEO grant money, you're looking at about $85,000 per charger. The one thing I will add is these are kind of worst case estimates. Things like the installation and utility hookup. Obviously, if you add 2 chargers, that does not double in cost. It does go down the more chargers you add, things like that. And these are effectively MSRP quotes. The vendors have said that they're traditionally cheaper once you actually submit an RFQ through the RFQ process. But so, again, this at least gives us a sense as kind of worst case cost to do this type of infrastructure. So finally, what we're kind of recommending is basically, again, 2 level 3 chargers that would go in at the Hiawatha Gardens. This would have the ability to charge 2 vehicles at one time. Again, these are the fast chargers, and the total cost after the CEO grants right now would be about $171,000. For the level 2 chargers, this would be 2 different chargers at Hiawatha Gardens with the ability to charge 4 vehicles. And again, the cost would be about $15,000. So we've talked about the Colorado Energy Office grant. That's something that we are applying for at the end of January. So Nancy's been working on the grant application, so that is something that we're planning to submit. It's something, if we are awarded the money, we don't actually have to spend it. It's there for us to use if we decide to move forward as a city. However, there are 4 other avenues we are investigating for sources of funding. So first is Colorado Springs Utilities. We have actually been in contact with them. Many of the other utilities throughout the state do offer incentives or rebates for installing these types of electric vehicle chargers. Colorado Springs Utilities has told us that they are planning on getting a rebate program going, but we don't know the timing or what the rebate program will look like. So this is something that we're, again, in communications with them with, but we don't have any details about it at the moment.
They did tell us it would be a we've had a couple of meetings with CSU. We're not entirely sure if it'll be a rebate or a grant program as well, either or. But it's been assigned to somebody in their office, and they're putting it together as we speak. The big thing is that we were told that it's going to be on a first-come, first-served basis. So we've stayed in contact with them. They know we're online. We really are very interested in what they'll have to offer. So that's going. Natalie.
I have a quick question. I'm trying to think, so if we were to install these fast chargers, is there a way to make sure that people don't park there for 4 hours?
Yes, so one of the things they do, for example, is you basically, once you plug in and start charging, you typically either have to use an app or enter your phone number into the charger, and so they can actually provide text message updates. And what they do is they basically alert you when your vehicle is almost done, and then they give typically like a 10-minute grace period, seems to be the standard, and beyond that 10 minutes, they actually start to charge you a fee. So it's basically something to incentivize you to quickly, when you're done, unplug your car and move so that you're not hogging the chargers, so to speak.
And it can be a very high fee.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that the city would have control over. Obviously, if it's the city's equipment, they have the ability to adjust the fee, the structure for something like that.
So the other thing that we're kind of waiting to hear is what happens with the federal infrastructure bill. There's a lot of money in that bill for electric vehicle charging stations, and we're waiting to see how it trickles down to the state. Right now, we're quite confident that the Colorado Energy Office will once again be the conduit for those funds. So we think we're on the right track with having an EV coach, with talking to those folks, with submitting this grant, all of that. But we just don't know yet how much money will be available under that grant or under that funding.
Councilor Chandler, please.
Thank you. Do you have any data or information on what it would cost to maintain and repair these once we've purchased them?
So the costs for the chargers are based on estimates from one of the vendors, and those include 5-year cloud service and warranty. And then based on the cost to add another 5 years, when you're 5 years out, the reoccurring revenue from the chargers themselves would easily cover additional maintenance and cloud service fees. So the problem is a lot of them, it's the hurdle of that upfront infrastructure or the capital cost upfront basically to get it installed. That's the hurdle.
And I had one more question. This isn't a case where we're looking at, a year or two down the road, we're going to have the level 4 charger, and then these are going to start becoming obsolete.
That is a good question. So the chargers that we're looking at, I don't think there's going to be something like a level 4. The plug and the capability of this type of charger, or the connection, I should say, with the vehicle, is designed to grow quite a bit above where it is today. Now, that doesn't mean the chargers that we would specifically install. So, for example, let's say they can charge your car in 30 minutes today. In 2 or 3 years, there may be one that can do it in 10 minutes. So the infrastructure itself there's a reasonable chance it will slowly be, I will say, outdated, but it would still be very useful even 5-10 years out as a source of being able to charge your vehicle. At that point, I mean, realistically, if we have 1 million vehicles, EVs in Colorado, we're probably going to need quite a few extra chargers around the city, realistically. So,
and under the grant, Dave said our estimates are based on one vendor, but under the grant, if we're awarded any funds from Energy Outreach Colorado, we have to have 3 vendors to get,
For the RFQ.
yeah, for the RFQ. Yep.
So that's essentially all we had for the presentation, so I don't know if there's other questions or.
Yeah, this is Counselor Fortune, please.
Yeah, just, thanks to Roy, that we did put in a requirement for chargers, EV chargers at Hiawatha, into the Hiawatha Garden design contract. So I don't know if there's a requirement for 4 or not, how many we put in, but we can talk with them about it and see where we are with that. But they're considering it into the mobility hub section of Hiawatha Gardens.
A couple of other things I'd point out for council to think about. Of course, we're hoping that council will approve the largest match possible that you think you can afford, and I know you've got a retreat coming up to consider some of those issues. The other thing is that through this process of writing this grant, what I've realized is we need more EV infrastructure talked about in Plan Manitou. So Karen was kind enough to send me everything she could find in the plan that had anything to do with greenhouse gas emissions and vehicles, and we have a couple little statements in there. But one of the things the grant asks, for example, is what specific plans do you have as a city or as an organization around EV infrastructure planning? So it's important for the future and for future grants and that kind of thing that we start to get some of that in our planning guide, those kinds of things. The other thing is that codes need to be updated around EV infrastructure. So I know we're writing new city codes as we speak, but there's no reason why you can't put EV charging into commercial buildings. So for example, the Holiday Inn has taken it on their own to provide a charger there, but when we think about any commercial development in Manitou Springs, that should be a requirement. The other thing is new residential buildings. You go, oh my gosh, we can't make them, have EV charging. It really is like putting a dryer outlet in your garage. It's not a big deal, and it's so much less expensive to do it when you're building a new home. So those are a couple of things, both the code and in our planning documents that will help us move forward with EV infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Council, okay, Natalie?
This was just a quick thing so we were applying for grants for ours, and we did get one through CEO, but we turned it down because they had too many reporting requirements. Tesla didn't have any, so we just went with them. But we used El Paso County. So there's a county sustainability plan that talks about EV chargers, and we were able to use that in our grant application.
Oh, thanks.
Yep.
Great. Good to know.
Thank you.
It should be in Plan Manitou. I'm not saying it shouldn't.
Thank you. Councilor Chandler, please.
I'm embarrassed to say that I knew that there was a group working on this, but I honestly didn't know that there was a task force, and I'm so grateful to know that now. I'm thrilled about this beyond measure. I thought that this presentation was outstanding. I learned so much. Thank you so much for putting it together. I sent an email blast out to everyone on the Manitou Springs Climate Action Work Group and said, you've got to look at this and see if this, if there's anything that this group can do to support this effort. And many people got back to me and said they were just thrilled. I don't think it's an if, it's a when for residents and certainly business and tourism. It's essential, and the sooner the better, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
Just one final comment, and I realize you're going to be looking at different opportunities to get more free money. But I do think that you will be successful in getting the help you need from Manitou in terms of us kicking in our own money. I mean, if we're going to spend $80,000 a year on Christmas lights, we can spend $80,000 for a charger. So I appreciate all the effort you're doing to solicit as much money as possible, and just let us know when you need something from us.
Well, I'll tell you right now, the grant asked me what match we have. We have to have a 25% match.
Oh.
We know that.
Well, then I guess we need to vote on that tonight. If we're going to commit to a 25% match, is that what you're asking us
Well,
to
we
do?
don't have the final figure for you yet, but we're
But
close.
that's- And the
Um,
match
On the,
is-
so
the match
grant,
can't be from Colorado Springs or some other source? Or does the match have to be city money?
no, it can be from any source.
Can I do a couple of points of clarification, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, please, Denise.
Couple of things is, one, if we get this grant and it doesn't work out this time, you can turn it away and then reapply, and we have a year to do it. It doesn't require that we have the support to submit the grant, it enhances it. So we can say that we've had the meeting tonight, because I know you guys are doing a budget meeting, strategy, vision meeting, and it may not be the right time, or it may be the right time. That will be up to council. But part of it will be pulling the minutes from tonight of what was said and saying, here's the support that council has said, please support, move forward, and then when we get the grant, we'll look and see where we can get the funds. I know there's lots of other conversation going on with the private industry and other things, so we may not need those matching funds, or we may, depending on how this works through. The other thing, I would not say this is a formal task force. It's a group that came and we just started working together, so it's not like this is a formal task force and we're doing that. Now Dole has really taken the lead as the project manager and is working with CSU and others as we move forward.
It was a task force of two for a long time.
Yeah.
But another thing something Denise just said that I lost it. Anyway, we'll come back.
I was going to add that at last week's PPACG meeting, we heard that there are two full-time PPACG staff people working on EV infrastructure kinds of problems and situations. So there's growing support and recognition in the area for this. So it's nice that Manitou's out in front and doing this. And
We
then I'll
hope to
make,
be out in front. One other sort of heads up for council. So we heard from our EV coach a few days ago that that Energy Outreach Colorado was aware that they were going to be receiving another grant from a private source to put EV chargers in Manitou, and that we should speak to them. So we're being connected with them kind of as we speak about a meeting. So Dave can talk about this a little more, but one of the things you may be faced with in the future is if we hear that there's a private, what do you call them? Contractor, provider that would like to provide EV infrastructure at Hiawatha Gardens, it would obviously be their deal. But you would negotiate a contract with them that would say, we're not going to charge more than this much. We want residents to have a cheaper rate. This is how long your contract is good for, et cetera, et cetera. So you may be faced here in the future with, do you want to own these chargers and be responsible for these chargers, installing these chargers and everything else yourself? Or would you allow a private company to come in, install those chargers on your land in Hiawatha Gardens and negotiate what you need out of that? So there's a possibility you could be faced with some of those decisions here in the near future. And we could support it either way at this point.
okay, great. Anything else, council? Dole, you got something?
So first of all, we've offered them both jobs several times now, and they keep turning us down. So they did a great job. I also just wanted to share a little bit of a public works perspective on this. We're very excited about this, because Manitou is lucky that we're so small that the EV vehicle can actually service all of Manitou without having to drive a lot of miles. Like an EV vehicle, a maintenance vehicle could be difficult for like El Paso County, CDOT, City of Colorado Springs, because they have such large areas to cover. In Manitou, our vehicles, the small Polaris, the work trucks, the maintenance vehicles, if there's a goal to help transition into EV, Manitou is a good site for it. And then as we continue to do this, as we talked about Michelle's experience and having that consistent knowledge base, we're kind of hoping in Public Works we can also develop that knowledge base, how these chargers work. Like a Type 3 requires, they call it a pad mount transformer. So it's those, it's the big green boxes on the side of, on somewhere on the ground that has to transform it into the, the DC current. So there's a lot of these nuances that as we get to learn and understand, and maybe there's an opportunity to get chargers up at Public Works. Maybe there's opportunities to help the school district get chargers. So we're kind of excited to learn about this, understand this process for, the future investment as we work, in town in perpetuity.
Great, thank you.
I want to give a shout out to Roy too, because he's been a good addition to our task force, and as you probably know, he's really been checking out electric vehicle trolleys and that kind of thing. David has also been talking to the police here about electric vehicle cruisers because they are here, they're being used. We've hooked them up with Boulder, where the sheriff's office there has one. So we're talking about that. So it's moving in that direction. If you really want to get excited, you got to see the new, what is it? The new Ford.
The F-150 Lightning.
F-150 Lightning Ford. That's got to be the next vehicle for Public Works. They can take their own power supply any place they go. So, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Very much.
Well, council, we've been at it we're going on close to an hour and a half, so why don't we take a break and maybe come back about 25 of 8? That sound okay?
Until we get the grant, whatever, we have, it doesn't need to happen tomorrow. Yeah, no, we're.
If we can, it's kind of like being pre-qualified. We go to, we get off our house.
So then we have to support.
Well, that's right.
I mean, what do you say?
Yep. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started again. The next agenda item is first reading of ordinance number 0222, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, amending Title 18 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code to update the commercial zone district standards. And we have Michelle and Dylan to get us started.
I can jump in there first, Mary, if you don't mind, and then I can have Michelle jump in and add if she needs to.
Have at it, Mr. Parker.
Thank you very much. City Council recalled that this is a request to basically make some relatively quick changes to some of the height and setback standard in the commercial district. We've drafted an ordinance from my office basically reducing a height variance option so that the maximum height that would be allowed in the commercial district is now 28 feet. There was a provision in your code that allowed for an additional, I think it was up to 35 feet, I believe, if you met certain specifications, and that's been eliminated, so the maximum height will now be 28 feet. And then it also increased the front setback to 20 feet in the commercial district. And this went to the Planning Commission for review, and the Planning Commission provided some suggestions, including adding the same restrictions or making it the same for the redevelopment overlay zone district, which is basically where the urban renewal area is for urban renewal redevelopment, which is in the commercial zone district still. Because if we didn't address that, you can still get those different limits in the redevelopment overlay district, which would maybe be inconsistent with what you wanted for the entire commercial zone district. So the ordinance in front of you makes those changes, and then it got into your packet pretty quickly. It still contains some of the emergency language, which I would recommend that if City Council desires to pass it, you just give us direction to get that emergency language out of the second reading version, and it would just be a regular ordinance with 2 readings versus an emergency ordinance with just 1 reading. So before you is basically the same ordinance that was requested by City Council to change the height and setback limitations in the commercial district, but also do the same thing for the redevelopment overlay district.
Thank you for that background information.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, in that case, Michelle, Dylan, if you would like to add on?
I think Mr. Parker summed it up fairly well. There was a little bit of discussion, and from a staff standpoint, at the Planning Commission meeting, when planning staff had first recommended doing a code amendment instead of a moratorium, I think we were thinking that we would just do away with the height bonus, which was up to 40 feet, and maybe put another 5 feet onto the front setback. So that's actually gone from 10 feet to 20 feet, and then the height, that 28 feet, is a little tight for a commercial area. It's Planning Commission felt comfortable with it, which is why they've recommended that. But I did just want to bring it up because we have had some comments from the URA and some concern about whether that's going to potentially, because we are talking about this being in place for maybe the next 9 months, and we certainly don't want to have issues where maybe somebody right now is looking at a redevelopment and could be discouraged, and maybe if the height is a little lower than what they're comfortable with. But whatever council passes, obviously that's what we'll work with, and if anybody comes forward, we'll work with them, as far as that goes.
Thank you. Dylan, do you have comments?
I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Well, council, this would be an opportunity here for us to ask questions of staff, but also mention that we have the chair of the Planning Commission, Alan Delwich, here, who might be, be a resource that we should feel free to lean on. And John Maynard, whom I believe is with the URA, is also here, and he asked to speak as well. So we have that. So council, at this point, I guess this would be a good time for questions for Michelle and Dylan. Okay, Natalie?
Sure. So can you still apply for a variance?
Certainly, you could apply for a variance. Now, variances are supposed to be extraordinary circumstances, and there's a pretty high bar for meeting the criteria. But if somebody could show that maybe they couldn't get commercial equipment, ceiling heights, that type of thing in, and needed a few additional feet, they could certainly come through and go through that process.
Okay, Natalie, yes.
Okay, because I was kind of wondering too about what the definition of new construction is, because I was kind of thinking about that setback piece in terms of if someone wanted an outdoor patio or something along those lines. I don't think that's our intention to prohibit that, but I think this would prohibit that. So I'm kind of I've been diving into this code and zoning thing a little.
Sure.
So,
We actually have a situation right now that we're working with a property owner that's had that similar idea that a patio, on the ground, concrete slab, let's say, does not have a setback. So somebody could do, sidewalk side seating or whatever without a setback. However, if they wanted to cover that area with a roof, then that would apply whatever the current setback is. So the changes would apply, once they're in place, they would apply to new construction, whether it was an addition onto an existing building or a totally new building.
Thank you.
okay, and I guess that was my other question was then, when does it go into effect? Like, are there pending, I'm assuming there's like pending applications and things? Okay.
So we just actually confirmed with the city attorney's office today, it would go into effect at whatever point the ordinance became effective. Usually it's 5 days after adoption. And so we'll be accepting applications up till that point, and they would be reviewed under the current code.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
I wanted to see if I could have Alan come up and talk about defining, adding some language to the ordinance that defines how we measure the setback so that we're clear that we're measuring it either from the edge of their property line or from the public works, whichever results in a greater setback, to avoid that snafu we had with the current hotel. And so I wanted him to be able to explain that in a meaningful way to council. Is there any reason that you as staff would think that that would be detrimental or problematic?
No, I mean, the way the wording currently is that it would be measured like we always do from the property line. So if there's some public improvement on the private property side of that line, that would not be taken into consideration for the setback. It would just be measured from the property line, which I'll let Alan talk about it, but that may be why they felt that additional 5 feet over what had been talked about, the 15. Maybe they felt like that was pushing that back a little bit more because of that. I had originally suggested we try to put some language in that basically said setback from the property line unless there's public improvements on the private property, and then we do the setback from there. I think that was a little cumbersome. The planning director at the time didn't like that. I don't know if Mr. Parker looked at it. And so we didn't carry that forward. So that's what is in there right now is from the property line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps then it would be appropriate at this time to have Alan Delwich come forward and he could share his thoughts with us.
Hi, I'm Alan Delwich, 210 Violinda Vista. And I think Michelle summed up my thinking, that we didn't get to that in our discussion at our planning commission meeting last week, but that this thing, okay. We are, what Michelle said about saying more restrictive, whether it's, setback from the property line or the edge of the public improvements, whatever is more restrictive would be the wording.
Jeff, do you have any problem with that?
Well, I mean, I guess that would be, I typically think setbacks are measured from the property line. But you could change that if you needed to, but it might result in, I guess, varying applications throughout the town depending upon, where the public improvements are.
Even if we say whichever is greater, so it's clear?
Well, I mean, that would be clear.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it might, I guess I normally see setbacks being made from a property line.
can I explain, though? I know it's really weird. But the hotel, apparently their property line was really closer to was closer than what we thought, or farther than what they thought. I think I'm saying it backwards, right? So that's one of the reasons it's so close to the street. And so we wanted to, because nobody caught that there's a problem until after it got built. So I wanted to prevent that for the future by making it clear with this extra sentence, even though it may rarely come into play.
And are you suggesting the sentence basically be just applied to like all setbacks throughout the town, basically for how setbacks get measured, just moving forward for everything?
For purposes of this ordinance, at this time is all I was focusing on. I wasn't thinking about improving the entire code, but hopefully that'll be done between now and August. But for purposes of this ordinance, to measure the setback.
In the commercial district and the redevelopment overlay districts only, I guess? I'm just
For
trying
the entire ordinance, not for the URA only, not for anything only, for the entire ordinance, that the definition of how you measure would be as Alan just described.
I'm not trying to argue, my only point is that that would then apply to every setback measurement in the city. We'd be basically clarifying how you measure setbacks. Because this ordinance only addresses the height and the setback for, the front yard setback for the commercial and redevelopment overlay districts. Would you like to have just the setback measurement that we're changing only be applicable to the commercial and redevelopment overlay
Well,
districts?
ideally, for me personally, I suppose now that you've asked the question, it'd be nice to fix the whole code while we're at it. But if that's too much for people, I at least wanted it included in this ordinance pertaining to this ordinance.
And so if we did do it for just this ordinance, what we'd be doing, just to make sure I'm understanding, is we'd be basically saying that the setback in the front yard setback, that's the only thing we're changing right now, is the front setback. In the commercial and redevelopment overlay districts get measured this way. Basically the greater of the property line or a public improvement. And then it wouldn't be measured that way throughout other zone districts in the city.
Well, ideally, it should. That's up to discussion.
I guess my thought would be just to do it within the context of this ordinance, for tonight, for the near term. This would be the commercial zone. And I think our concern, I think the rationale here is that we want something that will get us through the next approximately 9 months, with the expectation that the complete zoning rewrite will address this in detail. So it seems like this would be a sufficient response to put it in the context of this. Does that make sense to you?
Well, that was my thought at first. And then as Jeff was talking, I realized, oh, yeah. If it's a side setback or a rear setback, we might as well have the same language applicable to all setbacks so we don't drive our developers crazy. Might as well be consistent.
Councilor Fortune?
At this point to just leave it with I'm good with the change, but only for the commercial and overlay, because I would rather kick it back to Planning Commission if we're going to change the entire city. I think that we really need their input if we want, because that would be a pretty dramatic change for the entire city, I think.
I don't know if it's dramatic. It only would apply in the rare situation where I realize that my property line is in the middle of the street and that I own half the street. And now my setback on where I can build is right next to my sidewalk. I would imagine that's a pretty rare situation. Michelle's like, no, it's not rare. Okay, help me.
Michelle, and then I think Alan has a
Yeah, it
comment.
actually is not that rare in any area of town. We have a lot of circumstance where roads were developed, and they're partly on, private property. And yeah, there's a lot of, although I think where you really would find the things that raised the initial concerns that resulted in this ordinance is really more in the commercial district. You're not going to necessarily note such concern in the residential areas because a lot of times the setbacks vary a lot more in those areas, and it's not something you're going to notice as much. Plus, you're not talking about a larger building like what we see in the commercial zone, closer to the road. It's generally a house, and there may be 5 other houses on that block that have the same situation. So I think that sticking to the commercial and the redevelopment overlay for this purpose, and then let us have those bigger discussions as the code update goes through, I think makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I respect that.
Good, thank you. And Alan, I got the sense that you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the whole point of this was, it's a temporary change while we're doing the code update. Because the big heartburn was too high, too close to the right-of-way. And this is a way to blunt that concern. And part of the proposed language in the update talks about possibly having a more nuanced rule for height, where within so many feet of the front setback, of the front right-of-way, it would be lower, and then as you got back farther from the right-of-way, you could go a little bit higher. But that's too complicated to try to throw into this ordinance that we're just trying to get through the next 9 months on. But that's where we're going in the code update discussions, to try to fix what is perceived as a concern by many in the community.
Okay. So I guess, Alan, for my benefit then, the ordinance as it's written now, and I'm guessing that you're probably familiar with it to some degree, what's your take on that? Does it need to be further modified at this point, or do you think what we have is acceptable?
I think that it's what we worked on, and that was a sentiment of the commission, was that 28 feet. I said maybe 30, but people felt like 28 really was what made them comfortable. And the only thing is that front setback situation, I don't know if that's throughout the URA, that the sidewalks are half on the owner property. So that would be the only reason to add that language that Julie's suggesting.
Just in case. Yeah.
Okay. All right,
Is there a
thank you.
problem with that, Jeff Parker, then, if we just, to respond to your question, if we modify the definition of the front setback applicable to this ordinance only?
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure I understood what we were going to be doing. And I think, so I'm clear, we're going to basically say that the setback is actually going to be whatever results in a greater distance from, I guess, whatever we're measuring from. Okay.
Right.
Okay, I get it. I can do that. Or it'll basically be probably part of the table that we're modifying, and it'll be part of a footnote to say how this is how it works in this district, in these two districts.
And then you're comfortable also with the proposal that we eliminate the entire paragraph 8? Is that what you're referring to with the emergency thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
what I would like to do is basically include, I have a couple other sort of more technical suggestions, but I want to get rid of the emergency wording in section 8, and then I want to make sure that our signature blocks are for 2 readings, not just 1. And then I'd like to also change the title and a couple of whereas clauses to make sure we're also referencing the redevelopment overlay district, not just the commercial district.
Oh, good
And
point.
so it'll be more just some cleanup stuff you're going to see in your second reading to make sure it's all consistent.
Good, thank you. Council, any additional questions for Alan? Alan, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Okay, I think we're good. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And although this is not a second reading with a public hearing, John Maynard had expressed an interest in speaking. I think he had contacted us all with an email, and he is on the board, I believe, of the URA. So if there's no objections, we'll hear Mr. Maynard.
Push that. Thank you, Mayor Graham, members of the council. My name is John Maynard. I've lived at 1320 Indian Oaks Place since 1985. That better? apparently that was not instructions given to the Planning Commission, because I couldn't understand a thing that was said in the hearing last week. Something you may look at with your AV folks, there was an override of previous speakers talking at the same time that a new speaker spoke, and I couldn't understand what was being said. So maybe this is the solution. For 50 years, I worked as a city planner in both public and private sectors. My professional experience included code writing and expert witness testimony, although neither was a main focus of my work. One of my first tasks as a new planner back in the early 1970s was to write some code language, and I drafted a statement and gave it to the city attorney, and he sat down with me, and the first thing he said was, "John, tell me in your own words what you're trying to accomplish, and then rewrite this to say that." And really, that is the first question that you should ask every time that new code language is being discussed. The second question that I think you should ask is, what unintentional consequences might result from this change? And I'll get into that in just a minute. The third question to ask, of course, is how does the proposed change fit with city policies, particularly in this case, Plan Manitou? I'd like to list a couple of unintentional or unintended consequences that I believe that this ordinance would provide. First of all, it's inconsistent with the urban renewal plan, and certainly this document that the Urban Renewal Board has been using to try and attract development and redevelopment in the urban renewal district. Secondly, properties, you're familiar with the district, properties east of Beckers and north of Manitou Avenue are small, they're shallow, they have a floodplain constraint, and by adding additional front yard setback, I think that you make some of those properties essentially undevelopable and reduce the ability to redevelop them. There are also properties outside of the urban renewal district which will be affected. I've heard of one property that is in the design phase, and this is in the commercial zone outside the district, where a 25-foot height limit would essentially make this project infeasible. And the proponent proposes a two-story building with parking under because he has a small lot, a sloping lot, and floodplain on the rear of the property. The proposed changes will make some of the buildings within the commercial zone legally non-conforming. And you may say, well, that's fine, that's just one of the consequences of code change, but to a property owner, there are impacts to that. There are potential financing impacts. Should there be a fire or other disaster to the property, you would have to rebuild to the code that's in place currently. I can mention two properties that I actually stepped off today. Adams Mountain Cafe would not meet the current setbacks, and neither would the Econo Lodge in one part. I believe that the proposed changes discourage rather than encourage redevelopment in the urban renewal area and potentially elsewhere. The plan for the urban renewal area has an economic component, and as I wrote in my application to be on the Urban Renewal Board, I think that the economic future of the city is in part in the Urban Renewal District, and should be doing everything we can to encourage appropriate design development. My last couple of comments. The public notice for this change may meet the legal requirements, but in my opinion, an appropriate way for an inclusive community such as Manitou would be to send each property owner within the commercial district a copy of the proposed code change, and then invite them to participate in the review process. We do this in everything that we do in the community. Why aren't we doing it here? Yesterday, we celebrated the birthday of Martin Luther King. King said, The time is always right to do the right thing, and you've seen that on yard signs throughout our community. I think the right thing to do in this case is let the zoning code update currently underway proceed to its conclusion and address the issues that we believe need to be addressed in the code. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And council, any questions or comments from Mr. Maynard? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Appreciate your comments. Council, do we have further questions or comments? If not, I guess it sounds like we definitely want to make some changes to the draft of the ordinance at the very least here. And my understanding is that could be prepared and ready for reading on prepared for second reading. So I guess I'm looking to see what council's pleasure is. Yeah, I'm sorry, I guess I'm looking for a motion here. Councilor Wolf?
Sorry, I got to pull it up. Where are we? Okay, I move to approve Council Bill 0622, subject to changes that the city attorney has agreed to reduce to writing for us pertaining to measurement of the front setback, and subject to eliminating paragraph 8, and subject to adding the 3 whereases we have now pertaining to the URA area, the redevelopment area, as suggested by the attorney.
And the signature block?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and we're also going to revise section 9 because that also increases, says the effective date's immediate. So we'll remove all the improper emergency language.
Okay, so we have a motion,
I'll second.
seconded by Councilor Chandler. And I guess I'd like to ask, Mr. Parker, is that reasonably clear to you?
Yep.
You have sufficient direction, you
I've
feel?
got it. Yep, thanks.
Okay, all right, just want to be clear on that.
I appreciate it.
Any further discussion from council? Certainly, Councilor Fortune, please.
Yeah, I am going to vote for this, but I did want to thank Mr. Maynard for his comments. I think that they were very thought out and present, and pause for concern, or cause for concern. My rationale is actually this is a pause in construction that we may not want in the future. So I'm excited about the new ordinance. Ultimately, that's coming in 9 months, but I didn't want to not acknowledge your comments because they were very thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would also kind of like to echo Councilor Fortune's remarks concerning Mr. Maynard's comments. So I think those were helpful, and it adds to the complexity of our situation. But I think we have some direction here. Thank you.
Mayor, can I just ask Judy, do you feel like you have an understanding of that motion? Because I know sometimes with it going back and forth. So do you have a clear understanding of the motion?
I believe so, and knowing that our attorney is going to be making those changes, and this is first reading.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve, subject to the modifications. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Okay. Motion passes 6-1 with Councilor Johnson voting in the negative. Thank you. And the next item, first reading of ordinance number 0122, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, repealing and reenacting Chapter 15.08 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code relating to the Housing Code. Michelle, I guess this is what retirement looks like, huh, Michelle?
ask me in a couple of months.
You'll probably be here to answer questions.
And that's just fine. So Aaliyah German, the chair of the Housing Advisory Board, is joining us, and Karen Birchtold, who will be taking over staffing of the board, is also joining us. Although you've not had an actual first reading on this, I know council has some exposure and was able to provide us some questions that we looked at and did some revisions from an October meeting where we were planning to go to first reading. So hopefully we have addressed the major issues, answered the questions, and we did do some updates thanks to Aaliyah was very helpful with both drafting language in the code and actually tweaking some of my responses to the questions. And so we are very excited about having this be the culmination of over a year's work, probably getting close to 2 years at this point, of the Housing Advisory Board to create a in-house, I guess you could say, housing code. Currently, the city has a housing code, the 1997 Uniform Housing Code, which I don't believe has been updated even by the building officials that drafted that code since '97. And it's adopted by reference in our municipal code. One of the challenges with adoption by reference is you don't have the actual language in that code where you can send somebody to our website, they can look it up, you can send them a link. It just makes it so much easier, both from a staff perspective and I think from a public perspective, somebody trying to look something up to see, whether they're in compliance or not. So it's not hugely different from housing codes all over the country. There's kind of a lot of standard things that fall out. We did try to tailor it a little bit for Manitou. It's one of the reasons that we included the waiver section, not calling it a variance because variance has a legal connotation and legal requirements. But to be able to allow the person that's actually looking at this to, if it's not a health, safety, or welfare issue, and it's, and the housing is functioning, not to run people through a ringer for some small technicality. So I think we came up with a really good, thoroughly talked about, and considered code that hopefully council agrees. One of the things that I think is worth noting, like I said, we do have a current housing code, so there already is some housing code enforcement by either when the rental licenses that we currently do have, the 4 units or more in a building, when those are inspected, Neighborhood Services looks at housing code issues, and also when she gets complaints from either tenants or well, usually tenants, where there might be a housing code issue. So that enforcement's already happening. We don't anticipate that just by the adoption of this incorporated code that will be incorporated in the municipal code that we would see a lot of new enforcement actions. We will, as the HAB works on the rental code that we've talked to council about, that will have some staffing needs and some work. There'll be some additional work that will be involved with that. So that's something that I think, council will want to look at and we'll need to present some information on. But from this, I think it's fairly status quo with the adoption of this, just, I think, a better product.
Great, thank you. Council, questions? Julie?
When we were talking, when the Planning Commission was reviewing similar health, safety issues pertaining to the motels offering some long-term rentals with some of their units, and so we were going through a lot of the similar things. And one of the things I remember we were debating had to do with the sink. So and I could be mistaken, but I thought we had agreed that not only do you need a second sink, but you're not going to have two sinks in the kitchen. We don't want diapers being rinsed out in the kitchen. And I didn't see that anywhere in here. It simply said you have to have a second sink and not just the kitchen sink. So I just thought maybe for clarification, we should just add you can't comply with this by putting two kitchen sinks in, because the way it's written now, I think that might be allowed. The other comment I had was that I remember also debating, and I think this maybe came up in the short-term rental discussions, but whether a baby or a child is a person. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but there was definitely all this debate. Well, it says how many people can occupy, and it's a baby. It's only 4 years old. So I see that you use the word person and occupant in the ordinance, and I thought that we should put something in that it includes children, so that you don't have that problem going forward. And then finally, I was uncomfortable about the waiver being solely an administrative process and it only coming before council if there is an appeal by the applicant. I'd be more comfortable if it said that there can be an administrative waiver that gives the applicant a 1-year grace period, up to 1 year, to come into compliance. But if somebody wants a true waiver and they don't want to come into compliance at all, I would prefer that come before council. And not to disparage the staff person, but I just can't see a staff person being screamed at by some, homeowner or business and having to make that decision to waive or not. I would rather council deal with that. And those are the only 3 suggestions that I'd like to be considered.
Thank you. Other counselors? Questions or comments? I noticed in one of the documents in the council packet that staff had responded to a number of questions that had been presented earlier. I know I'd had some questions back in the fall when this was when it first had been scheduled to come before us, and I saw that you'd answered all those questions. I was pretty pleased with what you'd done, so I'm reasonably comfortable with what you have.
Thank you. I did just want to note in regard to the child issue, we basically have in the code that anybody, an occupant, I guess, is considered anybody over 2 years old. That way, if somebody is in a really small unit that really is too small for the number of people, they have, they're not just bringing the baby home and then having to, get out, you're in too small of a unit. They've got a couple of years to deal with it before it probably becomes an issue with toddlers.
If the goal is for this to be user-friendly and that the public doesn't have to read other things, then maybe you want to put that definition under the definition section of the ordinance. And it sounds like it's not controversial or problematic to say that you don't have 2 sinks in the kitchen, right? I mean, I can't imagine you'd object to that.
Yeah, I think we could just clarify the language in the bathroom section of the code.
Okay. So I guess the only other real issue to see, I don't know how my other council members feel about it, is whether we want, what is it called, neighborhood services employees making permanent waiver decisions on something that has to do with health, safety, welfare. I just don't want some baby to, burn to the ground in a building where there was an inadequate egress because some staff member decided to give a waiver. I'd like permanent waivers to be handled by council. And I don't know if you object to that, Mayor, when you said you like the way it is?
Well, I think you make a good point, and I'm thinking back in the history of Manitou, a couple cases where that might have made a difference. So I see some common sense and some wisdom in that. I could see adding a little language to the ordinance, and I don't think that would hurt it at all, and I think it would potentially improve it. We'd have the chance of doing more good than not. So Yeah, maybe you could think about an addition there. I noticed Leah had her hand raised, so let's see what she's got to say.
Yeah, hi, Aaliyah German. I live at 109 Cave Avenue, the chair of the Housing Advisory Board. So, yeah, thanks for that consideration. And I think if council is comfortable with that, then that's fine. We did have this discussion within the Housing Advisory Board, and we're concerned about, because we think there's certainly a potential for waivers because of the existing condition of buildings, and in a number of instances came up as we went through some of these items, and we, as Michelle said, we really tried to kind of balance the only including things that are really important for safety in here. But so when it comes to waivers, how often they really will be requested, we'll just kind of have to see. And so the concern was that it might be overburdensome for council if they really are simple things that might be appropriate for staff to be able to approve. You bring up a good point that, I mean, it is related to safety, and if council is comfortable with wanting to take that on, then maybe that's the most appropriate way forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and Julie, to kind of expand on your concerns, the two of the cases that came to mind were cases where people died of carbon monoxide poisoning. I mean, that should be pretty much a no-brainer. I don't see that there's a lot of wiggle room in something like that, but it's hard to guess what we're going to do. I get the question, I suppose we say, is does this room have adequate light even though it doesn't have a window? There's kind of a touchy-feely, subjective quality there. At the other end, we worry about, there's obviously clear hazards, with fire, carbon monoxide, and so forth. So I could see where, wanting to escalate this is probably a good idea. And if I would be interested, if you could maybe craft some additional language, could you give it a go?
Sure. I mean, I can try to do it right now if you want. Is that what you want? Or you mean later?
Well,
at
we
second
could
reading.
have it by second reading.
Well, maybe I can impose on Jeff. He's our expert.
Yeah, I'd be happy to just grab
I
something.
think what I'd like it to say is that the waiver can be, that a waiver can be only for up to 1 year if the intent for the applicant is to need time to come into compliance with the code or with the ordinance. However, if the applicant does not want to come into compliance and does not need more time and they simply want a waiver, then they come to council.
Yep. Okay. No, I can put that language
That'd
in
be
there.
great. And then, Mayor, if it turns out that we get overwhelmed and there's, hours and hours of requests about lighting and electrical outlets, we can always revise the statute, but I'd love to, the ordinance, but I'd love to start off on the side of safety.
Okay, I think I could support that. I can see, we'll kind of test it and see how we go. You had a couple of things there. I think one was do you want to add a definition of why a 2-year-old is not, why someone under 2 is not considered?
Oh, yeah, under definitions, and the words in the ordinance that I noticed were both occupant and persons. So you can add a definition section saying that means all humans age 2 and above. And that the mandate for a second sink, that the second sink may not be in the kitchen. And I think that takes care of all my concerns. Thank you so much.
So you're good, okay. Anybody, I'm sorry, Michelle?
That's right. I was just going to clarify that actually on page 3, the definition of occupant states means any person over the age of 2, living, sleeping, cooking, eating in, or having actual possession of a dwelling. So I think it is already in the definitions.
Okay.
I missed it, but that's fabulous. It looks like we don't need Jeff to add that.
Okay, what?
Except that we also talk in here about persons. Oh, no, but you don't have to define person. If occupant and person is age 2 and above, then I think you've already taken care of it, yeah.
I was going to ask a question about this sink as well. When I read the section on bathroom, which is on page 5, it basically, it's sort of subsection B3, and it says, every dwelling unit must include a bathroom that has a sink other than a kitchen sink. However, the sink does not need to be in the same room as the toilet and bathtub shower. Does that address the sink concern you have, Councilmember Wolf? I'm just, because there's also a requirement for a kitchen sink in the kitchen section.
Yeah, the way it's written, I can put 2 sinks in the kitchen. One is a kitchen sink and one is the bathroom sink that doesn't have to be in the bathroom.
Okay,
That's why I brought it up.
okay, I can make sure that.
I just don't want 2 sinks next to each other in the
We
kitchen.
can clear that up.
It's just a minor thing.
Got it.
Okay, great. Council, does anybody else have concerns or questions? Okay, if not, I think it's time to entertain a motion.
I move approval of first reading of ordinance number 0122.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second with the changes as noted per
Yes, thank you,
Counselor.
thank you.
Well,
Okay, so then the motion is to take the ordinance as written and then as modified with the additional modifications that we've just directed to Mr. Parker. Any further discussion or comment? If not, let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Very good. Thank you, ladies. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And please take it back to the HAB because they put so much effort. I mean, it's 2 years actually that you guys have been working on this. So it's a very impressive undertaking. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Nancy. And the HAB and Michelle, without Michelle's guidance and development of some of the code language, we wouldn't have gotten as far as we have. So I will thank the board for you. Appreciate it. And
Yeah,
thank Michelle.
and we appreciate it. It's probably something of a disappointment when this didn't go through last time in the fall. So anyway, we got her done now. Great. Thank you much. Okay, super. All right. It's time to receive or act on council correspondence. Does anybody have anything? Julie?
I've had a lot of concern about the darkness on the west end of town on Manitou Ave. Some ideas have been bantered around, and Denise has been really helpful, and Roy, in texting and emailing one of the residents who's been talking to me. There's a couple others. And so the bottom line is, it looks like, if I understand it correctly from Denise, that we're not going to have any Colorado Springs lighting there for quite some time, and the idea is to see what we can use instead for lighting so it's not so dangerous and dark down there. And I threw out to Denise, I said, I don't know, what about those big lighting machines they have on the highway? Can we get like a baby one or something and find a way to plug it in somewhere? And then John Shada said, why don't we use solar lights? And he started researching all these solar lights that aren't terribly expensive. So I'd really like to see some movement on that. I consider it rather dire. If you've walked there at night, you'll see how creepy it is. So I'd like to expedite this, and I don't know how best to begin.
Thank you. And perhaps Denise will respond to that when it's her turn. Anything else from council? Councilor Fortune?
Yeah, a couple things. It came up about if it was possible to put the council agenda on social media before our council meeting, just so that can't do that. Anyway, someone asked about it, so just if that were possible. We used to do it, and I think it was very helpful to the community. I was also was wondering about come up with some sort of a policy on how we're going to recognize people who are retiring or leaving a long-term job, whether it be staff or boards and commissions. So just something, I mean, I thought it was lovely what you guys did for Michelle tonight, but it seems like we should have had a council resolution for that as well. So if there was some kind of policy criteria for recognizing folks, and there's people that serve on boards and commissions that just leave with no recognition of long-term incredible service. So just a couple of thoughts. And lastly, got a question about the cinder block wall on Manitou Avenue. What the status? It's on It's in front of that bed and breakfast. I can't remember what it used to be, but it's been there for quite a while now. It's just this huge cinder block wall. And I was wondering if there was a permit. It's on the south side of Manitou Avenue, and it's a bed and breakfast. It was a hotel.
The big red brick building. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it looks terrible, and I don't know if there was it's just odd. It's an odd
Very
wall
tall.
in front of that building, and if there was a permit for it, and if so, what they're supposed to be doing, is it going to be covered in some way? It's just incredibly ugly and not, anyway.
And
So,
it may not comply with the setbacks.
yeah, I don't know about that. I'm just saying that I'm wondering if it was ever approved, because it looks odd. It looks really odd.
I know what you're talking about. I believe that's 461 Manitou Avenue, or thereabouts, just up from, just west of Manitou Auto Tech. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay, all right. Something I will mention, PPACG is sponsoring, help sponsor basically a class on infrastructure funding. This will be a Zoom meeting, 9 o'clock this coming Monday. I'll try and remember to send the link out to all of you, and then if you want to watch or observe, that would be fine. This will be sort of the ins and outs, what's currently known about the infrastructure bill and how small municipalities included, can be prepared for funding and grant applications and that sort of thing. That's all I've got. Yes, this coming at 9 o'clock, 9 a.m. It'll be Zoom. Anything else from council? Okay, if not, let's go ahead with the city administrator's report. It's been a bad day for technology. It started that way.
I think Denise is going to comment on the lighting, so I have nothing else if you're going to comment on that.
So we got the lights at Schmitzy parking lot. I think those are repaired, or at least part of them. We're still working on getting the last two, and it looks like a line was cut, so we're working on that to get that done. And then I know Roy and Dole right now are working on additional lighting to see if there's some lighting that we can put down in that area. But Councilor Shada, if you want to send us the information that you have on the solar lights so that we can look at them and go from there. Yeah. Great, and we can also research it. I know we looked at that for Hiawatha too, was some inexpensive lighting for that. So we'll see what we can get done in a fairly. I do know that the lights at the parking lot did work, then they didn't work. We just got that text, right? And so I know they were working on it today.
Maybe I think we still have some Christmas lights up. Maybe we can just move them up the street.
Yeah, there you go. Couple of other quick updates. We did a food distribution today, the best food distribution we've had. 30-plus families came to get food, so that was great. The library, I just want to remind everybody that we have an in-person meeting on February 23rd and a virtual meeting on February 24th. And let's see, there was another update that I forgot to write down, but those are the big ones. It was nice to have a healthy food distribution today on that.
Denise, can you say that again? What's the meeting on the 23rd and what's the meeting about on the 24th?
So it's the library. I know that some people have reached out and wanted to meet with the consultant individually, which we won't be doing. So the 23rd and 24th are the meetings for the library. Yeah, remember at the last several meetings ago, they asked for an in-person meeting and a Zoom meeting. And with today's world, I think you have to do both to meet both. Some people do not want to come in person and others may, and then also to do the Zoom. So it will be an update of where they are with the library with the architect.
Thank you. Mr. Shada?
Yeah, I've been noticing just recently that at night, there's a lot of perishable groceries that are being left around at bus stops over at the Soda Springs Park Pavilion. And I wasn't so concerned about the stuff that's like potato chips in a sealed up bag. But some of this stuff is, if people start leaving this stuff when it's warmer, it's going to go bad. And I just didn't know, do we know who's doing that and what's going on with that? I just started noticing more and more and more. It's on the stage of Soda Springs Park. Last night, there was all sorts of stuff that I thought, oh, this may not be all that great. You know what I mean? The next day, expired sandwiches and stuff like that, from Safeway or whatever, with the sale tags on them. And then I started looking at the dates on them, and I'm like going, ugh, this is pretty gross. Yeah, well, another thing, and I realize it's people their own responsibility, but, grapes and raisins and stuff are terribly poisonous to dogs. And last night, there was a big bag of grapes sitting over at the bus stop at Hiawatha. And I realize it's, dog owner's responsibility to have your dog on a leash, but if you're kind of walking by and those things are on the ground, So I just didn't know who was kind of doing that. And, I threw a bunch of the stuff away, but I thought, it's a new thing I've started noticing.
So
And
is it pretty much all around town? It's not a specific area? It's all, and at
Soda
different
Springs Park.
times? Okay.
Soda Springs Park and the bus stop over
Okay.
at Hiawatha seems to be the two food drops, okay, that they're leaving them on.
John, is it associated with the day of the food distribution?
I don't know. I was just asking what the question, what it is. And I'm just kind of concerned about, stuff that's kind of sealed up, a can of beans or whatever, that's going to be pretty harmless and whatnot. But yucky old expired sandwiches and things like that, I'm just concerned about, if we know of who's doing that and whatnot. It seems like to me, if you're going to leave things like that out, I don't know, I just don't want getting somebody sick.
Right.
Okay? A new thing I've started to notice on my nighttime walks.
Nighttime is like 7.
No, it's seemingly, I don't notice it at 5 o'clock. It's like out at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody got anything else? Okay. If not, we have 2 executive sessions planned, so I will go ahead and read the topics, and then I'll ask for a motion to go into executive session, and we'll make room arrangements accordingly. The first item, an executive session to determine positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, develop a strategy for negotiations, and instruct negotiators pursuant to Section 5.1D of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter concerning property acquisition in the vicinity of Serpentine Drive. And the second item, an executive session for the purchase or sale of property for a public purpose pursuant to Section 5.1B of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter concerning the potential acquisition of property for mobility and parking. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, great. Unanimous motion to go into executive session. Okay, if we could go ahead and secure the area, maybe take about, a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at 8:45.